watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
The American political landscape changed dramatically this past November 2nd, Election Day, as the Republicans won a landslide that swept them into the majority in the House of Representatives and considerably strengthened their position in the United States Senate. 8 American Jews ran for the U.S. Senate this past political season, all Democrats. 3 lost, including Russ Feingold, who lost his Democratic seat in Wisconsin, and 5 won, as Chuck Schumer from New York, Barbara Boxer from California, and Ron Wyden from Oregon all held their Senate seats, while Michael Bennet won election for the first time in Colorado, and Richard Blumenthal won in Connecticut, where he will now join Joe Lieberman, and now the Nutmeg State will have 2 Jewish senators. In the House, 14 American Jews were up for election, 9 of whom won, including Barney Frank in Massachusetts, David Cicilline in Rhode Island, Ted Deutsch and Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida, Ed Perlmutter and Jared Polis in Colorado, Allison Schwartz in Pennsylvania, and Gabrielle Giffords also won re-election. She's the first Jewish congresswoman from Arizona. And Virginia's Eric Cantor, the current minority whip in the House and the only Republican among the 22 Jewish men and women who ran for office this past November, Eric Cantor also won. This means that there will be 12 American Jews serving in the United States Senate beginning this coming January, and there will be 27 Jewish members in the House of Representatives. But the overarching story of election night 2010 is the way in which the political map of America turned red on November 2nd. What will the realignment in the United States Congress mean for America in general and for American Jewry in particular? And what might the new political landscape mean for U.S.-Israeli relations? For some insight, we're joined by Dr. Gilbert Kahn, a professor of political science at Kean University in Union, New Jersey, whose columns appear in various Jewish newspapers across America, and Professor Alex Grobman, who received his PhD in contemporary Jewish history from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and is currently the president of the Institute for Contemporary Jewish Life, a think tank dealing with historical and contemporary issues affecting the Jewish community. Both of whom share opinion this week. We hope you stay with us. First of all, again, let me thank both of you for making the effort to come here. I am very, very grateful.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Gil, can I begin with you? So we see this Republican sweep in the House of Representatives. From your perspective, what does it mean for America? Love to have any insight you have there. And obviously, for us, the real question is, what does it mean, if anything, for American Jewry and U.S.-Israeli relations?
I think that it's clear that, and I'm not the first one to say this, that this election is a clear statement that the American people are dissatisfied. They're upset. The word anger has been used very glibly, I think. They are frustrated. The economy is not where they want it to be. This was clearly an election about jobs, about economic future, about their homes, about their children, and insecurity. And I think the insecurity basically reflects itself in their saying the current people running government are people that we don't like or we are rejecting. Just like, and I think this is, by the way, interestingly enough, I think the ultimate analysis of the exit polling will show that Jews, like the rest of the country, basically said the same thing. I don't think there was a dramatic difference on this particular point. The sense that they were upset with the current regime. Since the president is not on the ticket, this then flows down to their upsetness with members of the House, members of the Senate, incumbents, but specifically also Democrats, since they were the controlling party. That then reflects itself in their saying, we're going to try something else.
Gil, there are many people who argued that this was, in essence, a referendum on Obama. Do you agree or disagree?
It was certainly a challenge to some of the directions that he was taking, to the nature of his leadership, I believe. For example, on the health care question, it's almost even whether they did or didn't like health care. But it's not like there's this overwhelming American response to get rid of it. Now, you can say if it's 50-50, then at least 50% don't like it and 50% do like it, but it's not a rejection of it totally. So what you have is the American people saying that they're not satisfied with some of the policies of this administration. I would argue, for example, that one of the big failures of the Obama administration was inadequate marketing of their own accomplishments. Now, they may have failed anyway, but this election ended up being, if you will, a reflection on his leadership, because I think he didn't adequately engage the American people on what he felt he had accomplished. And at the end, he realized it and it was too late.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what do you think?
I think it was a referendum on Obama and his policies. I think it reflected a distrust, an anger, frustration with the current members of Congress. Mm-hmm. I think Congress has done a very poor job in responding to the voice of the people. I don't think it's an issue of marketing in any way. I think Obama had been out there and his surrogates had been out there quite effectively explaining what they were offering and why they were doing it. I think it's a function of people saw what the programs are and the direction and the philosophy that he has, which does not reflect the American will. And I think it's going to continue in that direction.
You know, Gil pointed out that on health care, which was one of litmus tests, it was almost a 50-50 split. So that it always surprises me that people say it is clear that the nation wasn't behind Obama. We know that President Obama's approval rating had fallen below 50%. Congress was in the 30s and 20s at times, so that there was this anti-incumbent feeling. But I'm wondering what you are citing to say that you feel that the country as a whole wasn't behind Obama's policies.
Well, look, this was a major upheaval. They not only got rid of a substantial number of people in Congress who have been there for years, some people 27, 30 years, whatever, plus the fact they also threw out members, they also put in new members from in the government, in the governor's positions, which also is reflective of a feeling in the country that this is not the direction we're going in. So it's not only members of Congress, mm-hmm. but it was throughout the United States, except in California and in certain pockets on the East Coast.
What do you think?
I think that the American people are upset, and I think Alex is correct. I think that there is this very real pain that they have with government. And they have felt in the last 2 years that they're not being adequately helped. It is a very human response. It is a very natural response. We don't know yet whether or not this is going to be a turning point in political history, whether this is going to be a moment. We do know that in the off-year election, there's always a shift, generally in the sixth year rather than the second year, but the fact is there's always this shift. And so that it's a little bit unclear yet how dramatic it's going to be later. Now, what do I mean? It's an overwhelming shift right now, but what will happen in 2012 will give you a better sense of what this election represents. And that's I think what we have to sort of look at as academics and as scholars and as an analyst looking ahead, you have to ask yourself, this will be a watershed election if, in fact, it is affirmed in 2012. And that we don't know, obviously.
You know, I agree with you that there's no question.
You know, we just saw that there is an overwhelming propensity for Jews to lean Democratic. That does not mean that there are not many, many, many Jews who vote Republican and who support Republican candidates. But it is interesting, there was only one Republican candidate who was Jewish who was up for office, and that person won, Eric Cantor. All the others, whether they won or lost, they were Democrats. In the last election in 2008, more than 75% of the Jewish community voted for Barack Obama. In general, do either of you have a sense, a feel, for whether Barack Obama has held on to a number anywhere near that in the Jewish community? Alex?
I don't believe he has. I think that there has been a shift away. Again, we'll have to see in the next election how that is reflected. But I saw numbers of significant change.
I saw it basically in the high 50s as opposed to the high 70s.
Right.
Which is still more than 50%, but a considerable drop for Jews who, again, tend to be almost 3/4 in favor of a Democratic candidate. So my question for you, Alex, is specifically, why would Jews be less enthusiastic now about Obama than they were 2 years ago?
I think because of his policy towards Israel. Clearly, that's a major issue for some Jews who I know who voted for Obama, but are now very much concerned with his shift in a different direction than they thought it would be.
And can you give us a specific example of something that you think concerned American Jewry in terms of his policy vis-a-vis Israel?
I can only talk about those people who voted for him beforehand who are now concerned, and that is his policy towards a Palestinian state, the importance of a Palestinian state, the pressure on Israel for concessions, and we know that concessions have never changed the attitude of the Arabs in any way from the 1920s on to today. They've only emboldened and have only enabled the Arabs to continue their intransigence and feeling that they can wring all types of concessions out of Israel, and they can continue to incite their people against Israel and make statements that they'll never recognize the Jewish state.
Jews and Obama.
Let me just make a statistical observation. There is a real problem with assessing how the Jews responded to the current elections and on what issues. And it is a function of the exit polling and the data and the sample. I've only seen at this point one poll, and the poll suggested a little bit over 60% of the Jews voted Democratic. Mm-hmm. It is less than you might have expected, but given the climate in the country, it's not as bad as you might have thought would happen. I haven't seen the 50, Alex. I did know that, and again, the data that I saw came from a source, and you know, I'd like to see better inside numbers. So if it is 62, 63%, is it significant? It's a shift, but given everything else, I don't see that as a major problem for the democratic affiliation of Jews. Second, Jews have been drifting away from lifetime Democrats now for elections, certainly since Reagan. And this drift, even though there have been blips up and down, Clinton did well in certain times, and certainly Bush did well on the other side, but the fact is, and this past election, as we know, Obama did very well, but the fact is there's been a general, and that relates to Jewish stability, Jewish sense of their well-being in America, their place in the society, their comfort levels.
What does that all drive?
That drives their willingness to move to the Republican Party, which they view.
That's interesting.
Because they view the Republican Party as more of a more conservative approach to government, And since Jews have become more successful for the most part, now they're concerned about tax policy, they're terms about their own wealth and their own stability for their families and their children, and they view the Republicans as being more likely to secure that. Now, the thing that I really have a problem with, and I want to make an observation about exit polling apropos Israel indirectly, and all the talking heads and the analysts, and that is that almost without a doubt, nobody mentioned international issues. Nobody mentioned Afghanistan. Nobody mentioned Iraq. Nobody talked the other night about, in the exit polling or in the analysis, well, I voted because I don't like what he's doing in Iraq. I don't like in Afghanistan, or I want us to get...
You wouldn't even know we were in a war.
That is precisely the point.
Interesting.
And as a result of which, these were issues which do indirectly or directly concern Jews. These are issues that did not come out. The only thing that came out, by the way, was China, and that comes out because of the economics.
What does it say to you? That the exit polls, that people coming out of the polls, when asked, why did you vote the way you voted,
Right.
Iran and Iraq, Afghanistan were not in the discussion.
Not even on the table.
So what's it say to you?
These are not issues that bother the American people. They're not at the... Now, let's look at, this is, I think, it's tragic, because what happens is we're doing a war on the lower middle class of America who's fighting. There's no draft, there's no visibility, there's no concern. They are fighting. Now, we may oppose, or someone may oppose the war, but it's not affecting my life. And it's, as a result of which, it's not a compelling issue. I am concerned about bread on the table, my house, my children's education, my security, safety, and so on. But I'm not concerned about that war.
Just out of curiosity, by the way. And
Yes, sir.
In some way, I owe the audience this question to both of you. Have you been traditionally a Republican?
I grew up a Democrat, but then I became educated.
Are you traditionally a Democrat?
Yes.
Okay. Anecdotally, is your sense that the Jews you speak to are as aware of and concerned of the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan as we may have been during the Bush years?
Well, I belong to an Orthodox synagogue that every Shabbat they announce in synagogue the names of people who were killed that week in Iraq and Afghanistan. So
Jews and non-Jews?
only Jews and non-Jews, but I mean, we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan.
I understand.
So they're talking about every American soldier who dies, okay? So yes, we as a congregation, and I know that there are other congregations that are doing the same thing, are very much aware of what's going on. We have our own views about whether it's we should be there or shouldn't be there, but yes, we are aware. I can't say for other people what's going on.
What do you think, Gil?
Our synagogue, I belong to an Orthodox synagogue also, our synagogue does the same announcements, by the way. And I think it's really an important consciousness raising for the American people and for the Jewish community that they understand. But I don't think it's affected the concern. They say, yes, that's terrible, but the taxes are too high.
I ask you the same question.
Yes.
In your conversations with the people you hear, the people you're with, even your friends, is the war now as much of a concern as it was during the Bush years?
No. I have a comment on something we discussed a few minutes ago, if I might, about the Israel issue. And I think Alex's observations about how that has driven at least some segments of the Jewish community. I think, however, and this is really a problem in terms of the data, because even the most recent American Jewish Committee study, in trying to assess where the American Jewish community is, and they do this every year, as you know, it's hard to isolate where the drift is on the Israel issue, where it's more compelling, where it's less compelling. We know anecdotally, and we know it intuitively, that it's much more in the Orthodox community, that this is a compelling drive to how they see issues, and therefore, how they vote. And I think as you move across to the unaffiliated, it becomes less and less and less. That doesn't mean that it is not an issue, certainly among conservative and reform and Reconstructionists. But the fact is that it is a much more compelling issue in the Orthodox community. And therefore, if and when there are those in the Orthodox community who see Obama as not as supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship, or as they see it, or as they posit that it should be, then they will move away from supporting Obama as they did in 2008, and they will reflect it, I suspect, in 2012.
Are you suggesting the people you talk to now who may have been some Obama supporters in 2008 have in fact moved away?
Some. Yes.
Significant some, insignificant some.
Probably, again, it's segmented based on religious affiliation, largely. But I think, yes, among significant in certain communities, definitely.
And do you feel it is justified?
Well, that gets to how I approach the
Yes, it
Arab-Israeli
is.
conflict,
Yes,
and
it
that gets
is.
to the question of what I believe ought to be. I think the question really is, you see, whether or not this administration, although approaching the Palestinian-Israeli resolution and conflict, whether they are approaching it correctly or not, and whether the Bush administration had a better answer for that. From my own perspective, I don't believe this administration is any less supportive of Israel than the preceding. They are approaching things differently. They are trying to be more engaged. Whether I think they ought to or not, that's not the question. The question is they are seeking to be more engaged and trying to drive this issue. I may say that's not the way to go. I could argue that geopolitically there are other issues that should be more compelling in the region, but that's the decision they made. That doesn't suggest that they are less supportive. Did they make mistakes? They made mistakes. Were there bumps on the road? Sure there were. But one could argue the other way around, and namely that, and I think this is correct, that the Bush administration's approach to the conflict was, whatever you do, we'll say fine. And I may argue that friends sometimes have to tell friends, I think that's a lousy idea.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you are more comfortable with the Obama administration's approach to Israel than some of your friends in your Orthodox synagogue may be.
Yes.
Yes. And it sounds like basically Gil is more comfortable with the Obama approach than you are, Alex.
There's no question.
Okay.
On one level. And secondly, I would argue that at the end of the Bush administration, they were pushing Israel in a way that I would not have agreed. But I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the conflict on the part of surely Bush or Condoleezza Rice and Obama and his advisors.
Both Republicans and Democrats have it
question.
wrong.
No question.
What do they misunderstand?
I think this is a religious war. I think they're not listening to what the Arabs are saying. I don't think that they ever have. You have someone like Hillary Clinton, who when she was the senator from New York, had Itamar Marcus, who heads the Palestinian Media Watch, come into Congress and talk about the incitement that is found in against Israel, against Israel's right to exist. She had him in the Congress to speak about that. And when she became Secretary of State, that's no longer an issue. The Arabs are able to do whatever they want. They could say whatever they want, but Israel is the one that has to make concessions. And the failure to understand the nature of this conflict, that is a religious war, that the Arabs feel that every inch of this land is kadosh, is holy, and that they cannot give up because it's a religious imperative, means that there is no hope for peace under those circumstances. Because, and by the way, when I was in Israel several years ago, when the Orient House was still open, which was the seat of power supposedly in Jerusalem of the Arabs, I went in and I spoke to them about a very simple question. What do you consider that the Jews own in the land of Israel, or in Israel? And they had a very sophisticated computer set up, funded by the Ford Foundation. And they said very clearly that Jews think that West Jerusalem is not occupied territory. wrong. I asked them, well, what about the land that the JNF bought years ago? That's Arab land. So I said, well, only a small part of Jerusalem called in Yamin Moshe, which was bought by Moses Montefiore, where you could probably hold a small group of people, that is owned. The rest is occupied Israeli territory. So if that's what the Arabs are saying, and Abbas is saying that I refuse to accept the fact that there is a right of the Jews to have their own state, to be a Jewish state, because it's apartheid, it's wrong. There is no way that you can negotiate with them. I know that Walid Khalidi, who's a major Arab historian, said that the de-Arabization of Arab territory in Palestine is viewed as a breach of the unity of the Arab people because it divides it from the Asiatic, from its African halves.
What year did he say that?
This was in 1978.
Do you understand that to use a quote from 78 in 2010, it's just flabbergasting.
Except for the fact that that view was held in 48, it was held in 78, and it's held today in 2010. By Abbas.
You think so? So you obviously you believe this whole thing's a sham, where he says he's ready to have a two-state solution.
Of course it's a sham.
Do you agree, by the way, with the overall perspective that Alex brings to this issue, which would make the Obama administration and anybody who is in favor of the two-state solution seem naive?
I would rather answer the question differently, sort of a classic Jewish
Do whatever
response.
you want. That's fine with me, Gil.
You see, even if I presume, which I do not, that Alex's analysis is correct, and it can be, it's certainly one of the ways to look at it, no question. My concern is the following, that in this climate today, and looking at Israel's survival for the future, Israel has a number of choices to make, operationally, tactically. And this administration in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem has the capacity to do much more to call the bluff of the Arab world. And Alex may indeed be proven correct.
We did that in Oslo.
Let me just finish. The bottom line, however, is that the internal politics in Israel do not permit the Netanyahu government, if indeed it was predisposed to do so, to call their bluff. Because
How is that?
Sorry?
Because
Because of the nature of the coalition that he's built up. I mean, it's a very clear issue that the coalition is such that it can't stand, it probably can't stand if, in fact, for example, whether or not you have an extension of the settlement freeze or not, does not affect ultimate resolution of the conflict. What it does affect is pushing the button, and pushing the button saying, all right, do it. Now you guys, Arabs, sit on the table and you pony up. If not, we've called your bluff. Because
and you said by not extending the settlement freeze, you've lost that button.
well, it's one of the buttons that, but on the other hand, the Netanyahu government is absolutely strangled by assuming that they wanted to do it. If Bibi wanted to do it, he's strangled by his coalition that is so much more to the right, both internally as well as some of his partners. And people in power don't like to give up power.
Okay, intellectually, not personally, intellectually, where do you disagree with Alex's analysis?
There are voices in the Arab world. There are interpretations of the Quran that are certainly not as limiting. There are people who understand the nature of realpolitik. There are people who very much agree 100% within the Arab world that this is ours, you have no right, no justification, and it is ours eternally. There also happen to be Jews who say the same thing. And therefore, do not want to approach compromise, and Israel has had to live with that also. So I mean, there are people who take different positions on the conflict. I think, however, that the Obama administration is arguing, give it a chance, because there's no downside for you. And now, I think there are upsides for Israel, you see, because specifically on Iran, because they could have pushed the U.S., I believe, even harder and faster by making much more serious demands on how the U.S. tried to approach Iran. They may have failed, because I don't know this administration is ready to call the bluff on Iran as severely as, but they could have tried it. There may have been other gambits that they could have played. But I think they pushed, but then they pulled back, and I think it didn't work.
Will the change of the congressional makeup now, in your view, have any influence on U.S.-Israeli relations?
I think that Ilyana Ross-Laitman, who's going to chair the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, will probably be rather outspoken in support of the Israeli government, more so than Howard Berman was. I think that's a voice that will be more out front. That's one possibility.
Will that affect policy?
It's hard to tell at this point. I mean, they don't make policy.
I want to address something that Gil had said. Again, he's taking the approach, if only Israel would do X, Y, and Z, things would change. The fact is, they tried in Oslo, they tried in Gaza, they tried with this freeze.
But I didn't hear him say it quite that way.
No, I know he didn't.
Did you mean it that way?
No. What I said is
no,
that,
but he was more nuanced. But at the end
but
of
the nuance is important. What he was saying was, at the moment, the only argument that you ever hear in the Jewish community is give it a chance. Everybody understands that there are irredentists in the Arab world who have no interest in sharing the land at all. The question is, are there enough Arabs now? Are there enough Palestinians in leadership positions that pushing this as far as you can to what Gil says is calling their bluff, to see if by any chance there really is now a Palestinian leadership which, even if it is a hudna and their long-term goal remains the destruction of Israel, that they will in fact for a period of 50, 60, 100, 200 years live side by side with the state of Israel. It's in everybody's interest. It certainly is the will of the overwhelming majority of the Israeli people. If it could happen, what you hear people say is, we don't believe that the Palestinian leadership either really means it, or even if they mean it, they don't have the power to deliver. The argument only is, let's see if for some reason at this point in time, the statements made by an Abbas and a Fayyad, which are very different than have been made prior, whether they have real bite to them. And the Israeli people and the Netanyahu government right now is saying, we will sit and negotiate a two-state solution. And those who disagree with you argue, yes, Abbas won't say it's a Jewish state. Yes, Abbas is not yet ready to relinquish the demand for a right of Palestinian return. But if the negotiations continue, everything changes, and those things will fall away. Let's see.
I think it's a fantasy. There has been nothing that's been ever said by the Arabs to suggest that they don't want the destruction of Israel. I just saw.
That's not true.
But it is true,
But
because
that's
they
not
act
true.
that way.
That's not true.
There was a
Abbas
freeze for how many?
Abbas speaks in a very different way than he used to speak. It may be that he doesn't mean it, but I mean, we've just sat with Izzy Liebler. Izzy Liebler's comment is, I don't care what they say to the Western press in English. I care what they say to the Arab nations in Arabic, and I don't hear Abbas saying the same things in Arabic.
That's the point.
That's an argument.
But that's exactly the point.
But at the same time, the rhetoric that is expressed out of the Palestinian community now is different. It may not be authentic, but you weaken your argument when you say it hasn't changed. Things have changed. There's a different kind of West Bank now, where there is prosperity, where cities are built up, where there is far, far less violence and incitement, so that it may not be enough. I'm not convinced yet it's enough, but I understand why there's a push to see if maybe this is a moment that can change the landscape of the Middle East.
There was a freeze for how many months?
Doesn't matter.
No, but I'm asking, did anything happen during that period
yes,
of time? What happened?
The answer, I don't understand why people say nothing happened. In the 9th month, he came.
Right.
He came what?
He came to the table. He came to Washington. He sat with Netanyahu.
So did Arafat. So what?
But you can't say to me, did anything happen? And I give you what happened, and you say it doesn't matter.
No, because
you say it as if nothing happened. It's not that nothing happened. Abbas came and sat with Netanyahu. And don't get me wrong, I'm not yet, the Messiah hasn't come. But I understand those who argue, give it a chance. That's all. Give it a chance.
But I've been hearing that argument since the 1920s, and I haven't seen the rhetoric. But we say, "Lo hamidrash ikar el hamasa."
Yes.
Okay.
It's the deed that matters, not the commentary.
Okay. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for actual deeds, and that I haven't seen.
So, I mean, I think there are two things that are critical in looking at the way the Palestinians are behaving. And I think that that is a measure to some extent of both the good and the bad. Salim Fayyad is extraordinarily respected in the West. People know a lot about him. And they have seen in the last 2 years remarkable change economically and socially on the West Bank in the towns. There is no question of economic development, economic growth, and economic stability. Secondly, related to that, thanks to the U.S., there's now a major constabulary force on the West Bank of Arabs dealing with Arab problems. Now, they're not fighting the Israelis, but they're dealing with local issues of police protection and so on. That's a significant change. And there's dramatically reduced corruption, which was the hallmark of the Arafat years on the West Bank. Does that mean that the Messiah is coming? No. But that's dramatic. That's one thing. On the other side, by calling Abbas's bluff, you force him to figure out what he's going to do with Hamas. You force him to say, look, you think you can make a two-state solution? You think you're ready? That's fine. Now tell us how you're going to deal with those both on the West Bank, but even more so obviously in Gaza, who are going to oppose you. Show us your muscle. And that's his challenge.
And you're saying there's value in that in and of itself.
Challenge him, because you can challenge him. Now, I don't know that he can do anything. I'm not that sanguine. But the fact is, I'd put it to him.
You understand that, again, Alex is saying that those who are hoping there may be a change, they don't show Alex anything concrete. There's no maaseh here. Show me something they've done. And usually what's quoted is, there's better economy and the police has been built up on the West Bank. But it isn't in relationship to Israel. There are some who argue, by the way, Alex, incitement is down. That is directed at Israel. And then Alex says, we have been here before, and there's no reason to assume now things are different.
But,
what would you say?
But, we have a cold peace with Egypt. We have diplomatic relations. We have international patrols. But essentially, life goes on. I'm not suggesting that if they were to sign a treaty tomorrow that the Palestinians would fall in love with the Israelis and the Israelis would fall in love with there'll be a border, there will probably be a fence, there'll be some kind of security on the Jordanian riverside, there's going to be a demilitarization, there are going to be major issues involved, assuming you could get there. But the fact of the matter is that you could have a cold two-state solution.
The fundamental problem with that is that with Egypt, once they got Sinai back and they got back some of their dignity, they didn't care about the rest. Okay, the Arabs who are living in Israel or Yehuda and Shomron feel that all of that country is theirs. There's a significant difference, and that has not changed. And the interesting thing about the economic discussion was that Abba Eban and Ben-Gurion made that argument from the very beginning, and Ben-Gurion said later on that he made a mistake because a major Arab leader came and said, we don't care. We'd like to let the land can be fallow. It's going to be ours. And that's the same argument they made when they came in and they destroyed the hothouses in Gaza. We don't care about the economic issues. This is our land. And to me, show me, this is the same argument that we hear over and over again, but the Arabs take a different view. So all of this stuff is very nice, very Pollyannish, but and very academic. You know, an academic says, well, we should give, and very nuanced, etc. I'm looking for the nuance, but I'm also looking for what we call tachlis, for actual information that says, yes, we have changed. We're on a different page. We want peace. You want cold peace? You don't have to love us. Who cares? But we accept your right to exist as a Jewish state. That has not happened.
See, my reply would be the following, Alex, that I think that the Israelis have to look beyond the moment. And the Obama administration, I think, was trying to lead them there and saying to them, look, if you have no downside, what do you want from us if we can get you to come along with us a little longer on this? If we talk about the moratorium, for example, or if we talk about other gestures. If there's no downside in these continuing ongoing discussions, if there's no downside in terms of your own safety and security at the moment, let's see if we can't keep this going, and we will in turn. And then you write the list. Iran, weapon systems. I mean, think about the fact, and I don't know it myself, I only know what I read. The Saudis have already apparently agreed to let Israel overfly Saudi Arabia if they want to attack Iran. Now, who would have thunk, as they say? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want that to happen. That's not a scenario I'm looking for. I don't want the Israelis to do that. But the fact is, if the Saudis have talked to the Israelis about that option or that potential, that's pretty significant. Now, why did it happen? We know why. The Saudis are scared of the Iranians. But, I don't care what their motivation is. If there is that connection, it's okay.
But that's not the Palestinians.
But I think the who pipes the piper? I mean, at the end of the day, Abbas goes to the Arab League and says, "Can I or can I not?"
And what did the Arab League say?
Originally, they said, "Go ahead with the moratorium, by all means."
Oh, for the moratorium, yes, but
we don't know where it's going to go.
What happened was there anything that happened during the 9 months? So they came to the United States. So what? They always come to the United States. Why not? The United States has been throwing money at the Palestinian Authority.
They then met every 2 weeks, and they didn't meet the second time in Washington. A process began.
But
I'm just saying to you, for people who say it was 9 months, 10 months, the reality is, while the moratorium was in place, a process began.
Would you be willing to bet your house, your property, that a moratorium is going to work with these people? That that's going to be the motivating factor? That they only need time?
By the way, you understand, and this
not you, but I'm talking.
I know, but I want to say this gently. The phrase "these people" reflects a mentality. And I understand how angry Jews have a right to be, because from a Jewish perspective, which I happen to think is true, from a Jewish perspective, from 1937 and 38, we said, okay, we'll share the land. And we said we share the land in 47, 48. And there were those who said, why should I share what is mine in total? That's what the Arab world said. It wasn't Palestinian. The Arab world said, I don't care if you can make my garden green. It's my garden, brown or green. You have no right to any part of my garden. So it's easy for you Jews to say, we'll share. Sure, but you're sharing half of mine. That was the Palestinian orientation. And it has led to war as opposed to some kind of peaceful compromise. So I understand that.
Has it changed?
People who are more educated in this than I am sit where you are and tell me all the time there has been significant enough change to warrant pushing this process as far as it can go. And it comes back to the word bluff. And I understand what Gil means here. If it turns out that ultimately the Palestinians really don't want a two-state solution, they will have to come clean on that.
Yeah, but I've heard the same argument during Oslo, during Gaza, and long before that. In other words, the same.
It wasn't during Gaza.
But
We
it's
didn't hear it during Gaza.
But it's the same argument. If we only did this, we would.
But the only
we have
thi-
to.
the only thing I think they should do now is sit at a table together. That's all.
Fine,
They
let them
should
sit
sit at a
together.
table
But
together.
but what are they doing? What are the concessions that the Arabs are making?
At the moment, they've made none. You are correct. It bothers me, but
No. So if you stop
Gil,
the
that
incitement-
bothers me. It bothers me.
I agree.
But that's the United.
Okay.
That's Obama.
Okay,
No,
but I will
no,
just
no,
I will
be
tell
careful,
you
be
I will tell you
careful.
what those on the left say, and I'm now not saying far left. I'm talking about those who really believe in this process. They say the following: Israel is the stronger of the two. Israel has a different mentality as well. And therefore, we within the Jewish community ask of ourselves, yes, it's not equitable that we, the Jews, have to make the compromise. We have to show goodwill, and the other side doesn't. But if it gets them to the table and ultimately gets them to a peaceful resolution, so what? So what?
I agree.
We agree.
We agree that so what?
So what?
But it has never happened.
Right.
And there is no indication today that this is going to happen.
Okay, before
Sorry,
I
go
lose,
ahead.
before I run out of time here, I want to come back to the ultimate question
Yes.
that I had for you, which is, from your perspective, does the change that occurred November 2nd, where Republicans won the House, won many more seats in the Senate, won gubernatorial offices, will it have an impact in your mind, for good or bad, on the Obama administration's attitude towards Israel?
The answer is I'm not sure. It can go either way. There could be enough pressure on the part of the Republicans to effect the change, or Obama can say to himself that my failure to succeed on the domestic field will push me to do other things in the foreign, in the outside, in the international arena, and Israel is pushable. Israel is expendable, and that's what I am very much concerned about. And I think that he is not Ohev Yisrael. I think he was extremely.
He is not a lover of Israel.
He was not. He's
A
not a
friend of
lover.
Israel.
He's not a friend of Israel.
You think he's not a friend of Israel?
in any way, any stretch of the imagination.
Because there the two of you disagree fundamentally.
I know, and I think that he was extremely influenced by Edward Said, and I think he was extremely influenced by Rashid Khalidi, and extremely influenced by Reverend Wright and the other anti-Israel people who he has surrounded himself with. And by the way, the point that you made about all of these experts, just like when you're going to invest, you ask a person, what is your track record? And many of these people have pretty bad track records in the past on what's going to happen.
So, Alex says clearly, Obama is not an Ohev Yisrael. He is not a friend of Israel. To which you answer, Gil.
I take issue with that. There are mistakes, and there are people around him, some of whom you didn't mention, who I have trouble with. But I think it's a little hard to push Rahm Emanuel aside, David Axelrod aside, and a lot of the other people working in this administration, people who I know from their previous jobs on Capitol Hill and other places, whether it's Dennis Ross, there are a lot of folks there who would walk. And I think also that you grow up in Chicago politics, you have a rough and tumble attitude. You know where the bodies lie, and you also know where the friends are. I think that Obama was probably at one point influenced in the last 2 years by certain people in the administration, but I also believe that it all got cleaned out and flushed out. Were there mistakes? He made mistakes. There's no question. But, I think that to suggest that, which I find very troubling, that he's not really truly sensitive to the concerns, the needs, and the safety and security of Israel. I have that. It's a very serious charge that I find very upsetting.
It could be upsetting, but prove me that wrong.
I asked both of you, and I think you've answered me. I want to make sure one last time. Alex says he's not sure which way it's going to go, the new makeup of the Congress as it affects U.S. policy. And you feel?
I don't think there'll be a change. I think, look, the U.S. Congress, Republicans or Democrats, come and go, election or election, the U.S. Congress is solidly in support of the state of Israel, the safety and the security, and nothing will change that.
May I mention that you just wrote a book, The Palestinian Right to Israel.
Correct.
The Palestinian Right to Israel, in which you really explain why the Palestinians don't have a right to Israel, correct?
Correct.
It may be a misleading title. There's irony to the title. And I would love a chance at some point to bring the two of you back to talk not necessarily about American politics, but about where Israel can go in the future, because both of you have really something to say there as well. But it is so kind of you. Both of you went out of your way here to sit with me at this table, share your ideas with our audience. Gil and Alex, I thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those were the thoughts of Dr. Gilbert Kahn, Professor of Political Science at Kane University in Union, New Jersey, and Professor Alec Grobman, President of the Institute for Contemporary Jewish Life. I hope you enjoyed hearing them. And by the way, just so you know, this is the book that Alex just wrote, The Palestinian Right to Israel. You might want to try to pick it up. And as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments to the ideas expressed by Gil Kahn or Alex Grobman. What do you believe the new political landscape in Washington will do in terms of U.S.-Israeli relations? Please email me or write me this week. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Gollum. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.